I think my oldest daughter, Bryce Dallas Howard, was quoted as saying she had never seen an episode of Happy Days. I think she's seen snippets and bits.
Imagine being just 6 years old, sitting under bright studio lights, millions watching you every week. And the one person you had to call aunt in front of America barely looked you in the eye. Ron Howard was America's red-headed darling, Opie Taylor, the innocent boy of the Andy Griffith Show. To viewers, he lived in a small-town paradise where laughter was easy, problems were simple, and love was unconditional. But behind the cozy picket fences of Mayberry, Howard's childhood wasn't always so sweet, because the woman who played America's warmest, most lovable Aunt Bee was also the one who pushed him too far. Frances Bavier. To audiences, she was a saint. To Ron Howard, she was a wall of coldness he could never climb. She didn't scream, she didn't gossip. But her quiet distance, her refusal to soften, left a scar on the boy who spent his childhood pretending she was family. It was more than just a personality clash. It mirrored deeper feuds that divided the cast. Even Andy Griffith himself wasn't immune. The perfect Mayberry everyone thought they knew, it was held together by silence, not harmony. And decades later, when Ron Howard had become an Oscar-winning director, he still carried that memory, that lesson, that pain. So how bad did it really get? Why did Aunt Bee push Ron Howard away? And what did Ron learn from it that shaped the rest of his life? From Happy Days to A Beautiful Mind. Let's pull back the curtain on a decades-old feud finally revealed. The illusion of Mayberry. For millions of Americans in the 1960s, The Andy Griffith Show wasn't just television. It was comfort, a half-hour escape into a world that seemed untouched by the turbulence of the outside world. Neighbors knew your name, fathers solved problems with a fishing pole, and Aunt Bee always had dinner on the table. It was a Norman Rockwell painting brought to life, gentle, wholesome, and reassuring. But the truth? It was a painting, carefully crafted. Behind the set walls and the laugh tracks, egos clashed, resentments brewed, and some relationships turned icy cold. Andy Griffith's charm looked effortless on screen, but behind the scenes he often struggled to manage tensions among his cast. Don Knotts, the hilarious Barney Fife, sometimes bristled under the pressure of being both comic relief and perfectionist. Supporting actors jockeyed for more line, and Frances Bavier, the actress who played Aunt Bee, became increasingly isolated, refusing to join in the camaraderie that fans assumed was real. The illusion of Mayberry was perfect, but it was exactly that, an illusion. And for the youngest cast member, Ron Howard, those cracks weren't always easy to ignore. Even as a child, he sensed the silence, the stiffness, the glances between adults that told him something wasn't right. He may not have had the words for it, but he felt the tension that no audience could see. Young Ron Howard's rise, before he was a legendary director, before Apollo 13 or A Beautiful Mind, Ron Howard was just a little boy from Duncan, Oklahoma. Born on March 1954, Ron was practically destined for the spotlight. His father, Rance Howard, was an actor and writer. His mother, Jean, came from a theater background. Acting wasn't a dream for Ron, it was the family business. By age 5, Ron was already working as a child actor, appearing in shows like The Twilight Zone, Dennis the Menace, and The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis. Casting directors noticed him not just because of his freckles and red hair, but because of his discipline. Even at that age, he hit his marks, remembered his lines, and took direction like a pro. Then came the role that would define his childhood. Opie Taylor on The Andy Griffith Show. At just 6 years old, Ron became one of the most recognizable faces on American television. Audiences loved him instantly. His wide-eyed innocence balanced Andy Griffith's calm wisdom. His natural reactions made scenes funnier, sadder, and more authentic. When Opie laughed, America laughed. When Opie cried, America cried. But for Ron, the experience wasn't always storybook sweet. He later recalled a moment from his first days on set, a scene where he had to pretend a turtle was dead. He struggled, not because he couldn't act, but because he was still a little boy learning how pretend worked. Andy Griffith didn't scold him. Instead, Griffith turned it into a joke, made Ron comfortable, and gave him something more valuable than acting tips: reassurance. That kind of kindness stuck with him. It shaped the warmth Ron would later bring to his own directing style. But not every co-star was so kind. Because while Andy Griffith took Ron under his wing, Frances Bavier, Aunt Bee herself, kept him at arm's length. And that quiet rejection would become one of the defining memories of his childhood in Hollywood. From Happy Days to director's chair. When the Andy Griffith Show ended in 1968, Ron Howard was just 14. Most child stars burn out or fade away after their first big role. But not Ron. His career was only warming up. In 1974, he stepped into another defining role: Richie Cunningham on Happy Days. A wholesome suburban teenager with a good heart, Richie was exactly the kind of role Ron could play in his sleep. But he didn't phone it in. His chemistry with Henry Winkler's Fonzie turned the show into a phenomenon. Behind the smiles, though, Ron was growing restless. He didn't just want to act. He wanted to tell stories, to control the camera, not just face it. So he struck a deal with producer Roger Corman. He'd star in Eat My Dust if Corman let him direct his next movie. The gamble worked. In 1977, Ron directed Grand Theft Auto. It wasn't a masterpiece, but it was a statement. The freckle-faced boy from Mayberry was becoming a filmmaker. Over the next decade, he proved himself with hits like Night Shift, Splash, and eventually Apollo 13. By the time he won the Academy Award for A Beautiful Mind in 2002, Ron Howard had rewritten his story. He wasn't just Opie anymore. He was one of Hollywood's most respected directors. But even as his career soared, one memory from childhood stayed with him. A lesson he'd learned on the Mayberry set. A lesson about masks, about how some people play warmth on screen while carrying coldness in real life. And the source of that lesson was none other than Frances Bavier, Aunt Bee. The feud with Frances Bavier. To the world, Frances Bavier was the heart of Mayberry. Aunt Bee, with her home-cooked meals, soft smile, and endless patience. She was the safe place in the Taylor household, the glue that made the show feel like family. But off-screen, she was different. Frances was a classically trained actress, serious, reserved, and often distant. She wasn't cruel, she wasn't loud, but she kept people out. And that included the little boy who called her aunt in front of millions of viewers every week. Ron Howard would later describe her in careful words: difficult, cold, unreachable. He never attacked her character, but his pauses said more than his words. To a child, that lack of warmth stung deeply. The most famous example came during the filming of The Pickle Story. On screen, the episode was a classic sitcom setup. Aunt Bee makes terrible pickles. Andy and Opie secretly replace them. Hilarity ensued. Behind the camera, though, Ron hated every second of it. Why? Because he despised pickles. The taste made him gag. And yet, take after take, he had to eat them with a smile. Now imagine being a child actor, forced to choke down food you can't stand, while the woman playing your loving aunt gives you no comfort, no encouragement, not even a smile of reassurance, just silence. Ron didn't complain. Even then, he was a professional. But years later, when he recalled that episode, the memory lingered. It wasn't just about the pickles, it was about the loneliness, pretending to feel love that wasn't there. Crew members noticed it too. The chill between Bevier and Howard wasn't just in Ron's imagination. Others felt she could be polite, but distant, professional, but cold. Andy Griffith himself later tried to mend fences. Years after the show ended, he visited Bevier at her home in North Carolina. He hoped for reconciliation. Instead, she kept her walls up. The visit was short, stiff, and painful. The warmth that Aunt Bee gave on screen simply wasn't in her personal life. And yet, near the end of her life, Bevier made a call no one expected. She phoned Andy Griffith to apologize. "I'm sorry we didn't get along better," she admitted. "It was my fault." It was too late to rewrite the past, but it revealed something important. Beneath the coldness, there was regret. For Ron Howard, though, the scar remained. He respected her talent, he appreciated her professionalism, but he never forgot the feeling of being pushed aside, of being the boy who called her aunt on screen, but never felt like family behind the scenes. What Ron learned from the feud, that quiet rejection shaped Ron Howard in ways no award or film ever could. On his own sets, he became known as one of the kindest, most collaborative directors in Hollywood. He treated actors from Oscar winners to day players with respect. He listened, he encouraged, he made sure no one, especially young actors, ever felt the coldness he had once felt. In interviews, Ron never trashed Frances Bavier, but he didn't need to. The pauses in his voice told the story. The feud was real, it was quiet, and it left a mark. Because sometimes the people who are supposed to make you feel safe are the ones who push you too far. And that was the lesson Ron carried with him for the rest of his life. Cheryl and Ron, the love Hollywood forgot. Not all of Ron Howard's memories from the spotlight are cold. Some are gold. In an industry where marriages often crumble under the glare of cameras, Ron and Cheryl Howard built something rare. A love story that lasted. They met as teenagers in California. Ron was already recognizable, but Cheryl wasn't impressed by Hollywood. That's exactly what drew him in. Their first date was simple. A drive in Ron's mint green Volkswagen Beetle. A movie and a shared pizza. No red carpets, no spotlights. Just two kids figuring each other out. Ron never let go of that car. And he never let go of her either. They married in 1975 after years of dating, raising 4 children together, including Bryce Dallas Howard, who went on to become a star in her own right. But while other Hollywood couples posed for headlines, Ron and Cheryl chose something quieter. For their 50th anniversary, Ron shared a photo. No tuxedos, no gowns, just the two of them on a beach at sunset. His caption was simple: "It's been a river ride. Calm waters, tricky rapids. We just kept paddling." This was the warmth Ron didn't find on the Mayberry set. The tenderness Aunt B couldn't give him. Real, unconditional love that endured. In Hollywood, that might be the greatest achievement of all. A beautiful mind, and the burden of storytelling. By the early 2000s, Ron Howard had achieved what most child stars never do: reinvention. Twice. First as Richie Cunningham on Happy Days, then as an Academy Award-winning director. In 2001, A Beautiful Mind changed everything. The story of mathematician John Nash, his genius, his struggle with mental illness, struck audiences like lightning. It swept the Oscars, winning Best Picture, Best Director and more. It should have been nothing but triumph, but success always casts shadows. Critics pointed out what the film left out: Nash's illegitimate child, his early personal struggles. Some accused Ron of softening the truth. He didn't deny it. His reasoning was clear: he wasn't making a documentary. He was telling an emotional truth, not a complete record. Still, the backlash stung. Ron had wanted to uplift. Instead, some felt betrayed. It reminded him of an old lesson, that telling someone's story is heavy work. You don't just shape scenes, you shape memory. And that weight, Ron carried with him quietly. J.D. Vance in A Modern Disappointment. Decades later, that lesson came back to haunt him. Ron directed Hillbilly Elegy, based on J.D. Vance's best-selling memoir. At the time, Vance wasn't a politician. He was a man telling a personal story about poverty, resilience, and survival. Ron saw humanity in it and wanted to capture that. But soon after, Vance entered politics. His rhetoric grew sharper, harsher, alien to the spirit of the book. Ron had tried to honor. When asked about it, Ron didn't explode, but he admitted disappointment. "I barely recognize him," he said. It wasn't about politics for Ron. It was about trust, about empathy, about watching someone you believed in shift into someone you no longer understood. For Ron, it echoed the same sting he felt as a child, standing across from Frances Bavier, pretending to love someone who wouldn't let him in. Masks, once again, what Ron Howard learned about people. Ron Howard has spent a lifetime in story. He's made us laugh, made us cry, made us believe in heroes and love. But the hardest stories were the ones he lived. As a child, he learned that someone who plays love on screen can be cold when the camera stops. As a director, he learned that telling someone else's truth means carrying the consequences of how it's remembered. And as a man, he learned that not everyone you admire will stay true to the person you thought they were. But he also learned something else, that love can last, that silence can be powerful, that truth, even when painful, matters. From Aunt Bee's cold shoulder, to Oscar stages, to modern disappointments, Ron Howard never lost the ability to keep watching, keep learning, keep moving forward. Because sometimes the greatest stories aren't the ones we direct, they're the ones we survive. So now the question is, was Ron Howard's childhood on the Andy Griffith Show really a blessing, or a burden he carried for the rest of his life? What do you think? Did Aunt Bee's coldness shape him into the director he became? Or was it simply a scar he learned to live with? Let us know in the comments below. And before you go, hit that like button, subscribe, and tap the next video on your screen. Because the stories Hollywood tries to hide are the ones we reveal here.